The man who built his career defending battered women left her bleeding on a concrete floor with her wrists bound and her voice gone. 6 floors above, the applause was still rolling. She could hear it through the pipes. Every clap felt like a fist. This is the story of Alara Voss, the woman who survived the man the whole city trusted, and what she did next that nobody saw coming. Stay with me until the very end. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The charity gala had been Roman Ashford's idea, or rather, his accountant's idea. Some arrangement that moved numbers between columns in a way that kept certain people in certain offices from asking too many questions about the Ashford Group's real estate holdings in Midtown Atlanta. Roman didn't attend these things himself. He didn't shake hands over canapes or laugh at the right moments during speeches. He sent a representative, usually his operations manager, a composed woman named Sandra, who wore the same black dress to every event and remembered every name she'd ever heard. Tonight, however, Sandra had a family obligation, and Roman found himself in the parking structure beneath the Alderton Grand Hotel at 9:47 in the evening, doing what he almost never did, handling something personally. The Alderton Grand was one of 6 properties the Ashford Group owned outright in Atlanta's downtown corridor. It was not the most profitable, but it was the most visible, and visibility had its own kind of currency. Roman had driven himself here, another rarity, because the property manager had flagged a structural concern in the lower-level service corridor, something about a support pillar near the loading dock that had shown stress fractures in the last inspection report. Roman's engineers had already filed assessments. He just wanted to see it with his own eyes. He was that kind of man. He didn't take other people's descriptions as final. He came down through the service elevator, bypassing the gala entirely, his footsteps quiet on the polished concrete of the B2 level. The sounds from above were muffled but present. A band playing something orchestral, the periodic eruption of applause, the clink and hum of several hundred people performing wealth and generosity at one another. Roman had been in rooms like that his entire adult life. He had stopped being impressed by them at some point he couldn't precisely identify, maybe 23, maybe younger. The fluorescent lights in the B2 corridor had a flicker problem, another item on the maintenance list, and the effect was a stuttering underwater quality to everything. Roman walked past 2 service doors, past a bank of electrical panels, past a stack of folding chairs bound with plastic wrap. He was reading the engineering report on his phone, not paying particular attention to his surroundings, when he heard it. Not a scream. Something quieter than a scream, and far more frightening for it. A sound like a mouth trying to form words and finding the passage blocked. He stopped, looked up from his phone, turned toward the sound. She was against the far pillar, the one he'd come to inspect, which struck him later as the kind of coincidence that a certain type of person might call fate, and which Roman simply called chance. She was seated on the concrete floor, back against the pillar, wrist tied behind it with what looked like a length of cable management wire, the thin plastic-coated kind used to bundle electrical cords. Her lower lip was split and swollen. There was blood on her collar, dried brown at the edges, still dark red at the center. Her left eye was partially closed, the flesh around it purpled and tight. She was conscious. She was looking at him. Roman Ashford was not a man who panicked. He had been in situations that most people would classify as emergencies, and had felt, in those moments, a particular kind of stillness descend on him, something clinical and efficient that had served him well over the years. He felt that stillness now. He crossed to her in 12 steps and crouched down to her level, and he did not reach for her immediately, because even in the first seconds of seeing her, some instinct told him that a man reaching for her without warning was the last thing she needed. "My name is Roman," he said. His voice was level. "I own this building. I'm going to help you." She was breathing in shallow, rapid pulls. Her eyes moved over his face in a way that suggested she was calculating something, deciding something. He recognized that look. He had seen it in boardrooms and in darker places than boardrooms. The look of someone who had been hurt by a person they trusted and was now performing rapid triage on every new person who entered their radius. "I'm going to cut the wire," he said. "Is there anything else I need to know before I touch you?" She shook her head, a small, controlled motion. He took a folding knife from his jacket pocket. He used it once, carefully, and the wire came free. She brought her arms forward slowly, and he watched the way her shoulders moved, the stiffness in them, and understood she had been in that position for a while. She pressed both palms flat against the concrete and pushed herself upright, and he let her do it. He did not take her arm. He watched, and he stayed close, and he was ready if she needed steadying, but she didn't ask, so he didn't offer. She stood. She was taller than he'd estimated from the floor, maybe 5'7", and her chin came up when she reached full height in a gesture that looked involuntary, like something her body remembered doing even when the rest of her had forgotten. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Her voice was low and slightly rough, as though speaking cost her something. "Good. We're going to take the service elevator to the 4th floor. I have a room there. Private, not connected to the event. You can use the phone. You can call whoever you need to call." She looked at him for another moment, that calculating assessment again. "You don't know me," she said. "No." "So why?" "Because you were tied to a pillar in my building," he said simply. "That's enough of a reason." Something in her face shifted. Not gratitude exactly, more like the careful lowering of one specific guard among many. They went to the elevator. Her name, he learned in increments over the next 30 minutes, was Alara Voss. She was 25. She had been attending the gala as the guest, specifically, of the keynote speaker, a man named Cameron Vale. Roman recognized the name. Most people in Atlanta with an interest in legal affairs recognized the name. Cameron Vale had made himself into a particular kind of institution, the attorney who championed abuse survivors, who testified before state legislatures, who appeared on morning news programs with the careful, concerned gravity of someone who understood suffering without having personally experienced it. His organization, the Vale Advocacy Project, had handled hundreds of cases over 8 years. He had awards. He had a documentary in development. He had, Roman had heard, a profile in a national legal magazine scheduled for the following month. Roman listened to Alara talk about this man, and he did not interrupt. And he did not express surprise at anything she said, because surprise was something Roman had largely trained out of himself, and because interrupting people who were finally speaking after a long silence was a particular kind of cruelty he had no interest in committing. She told him about the first months. She had met Cameron at a fundraising dinner 18 months prior. She was there as a volunteer coordinator for a local shelter where she'd worked since finishing her undergraduate degree. He had found her between courses, had said something specific and perceptive about a program she'd built, something that demonstrated he'd actually done his homework rather than relying on charm alone. She had been impressed. It was, she said, exactly what he'd calculated it would be. She stopped there and looked at the glass of water Roman had placed on the table in front of her. She hadn't touched it. She looked at it now as though deciding whether she was allowed to want something as simple as water. Then she picked it up and drank. The first 6 months were... She paused. It wasn't what you think. It's never like what people think. It wasn't him yelling. It wasn't anything that was easy to name. She set the glass down. It was him deciding things. Small things first, telling me a restaurant I'd liked wasn't really that good. And slowly I stopped suggesting restaurants. Telling me a friend of mine had said something behind my back. Something unkind. And then when I asked the friend about it, there was just enough confusion in the conversation that I couldn't be sure, and then I started seeing that friend less. By month 4, I had fewer people to call than I'd had in years, and I couldn't point to a single moment when that had happened. Roman said nothing. He was watching her hands, which were wrapped around the glass now, steadying it rather than lifting it. It got worse after I moved in with him, she said. Faster. Like once there was an address connecting us, the performance became less necessary. He didn't have to be careful the same way. She described the apartment in Buckhead where Cameron lived, the way the locks worked, the way she had slowly stopped having keys to certain rooms. She described a particular evening when she had tried to call her mother from the kitchen and had found, the next morning, that her phone's call history had been cleared. She described asking Cameron about it in the conversation that followed, which had ended with Cameron explaining calmly and at length why Alara's relationship with her mother had always been unhealthy and how a little distance would benefit her. I believed him, she said. There was no embarrassment in her voice, just the flat reporting of fact. That's the part I keep. She stopped, started again. People think, Why didn't you just leave? But you don't understand that by the time it escalates to the part that looks like leaving should be simple, you've been living in a completely different version of reality for months. You don't trust your own perceptions. You don't trust your own... She paused. Your own knowing. Roman nodded once. 3 weeks ago, she said, I found a file. She described the file in fragments, the way information like that always comes back, in fragments rather than a clean linear account. She had been looking for a document, something innocuous, a lease renewal she needed for a rental property she co-owned with a college friend. And she had found, in a subfolder Cameron kept behind a secondary password on his laptop, a collection of files she had not been meant to see, legal documents, names of women, case numbers that she recognized from Cameron's public advocacy work. And beside each name and case number, amounts, large amounts, paid in, paid out, through shell accounts that had been constructed with enough layers that a casual observer would never connect them to Cameron Vale. She had sat with her hands in her lap for a long time after finding it. Then she had copied what she could to a drive, put the drive in the lining of a coat she kept in the back of a closet, and she had waited because she was not stupid, and because Cameron was powerful, and because she understood that leaving required more than courage, it required a plan. She had told him she was leaving him on the evening of the gala. She had chosen the location deliberately, a public hotel surrounded by hundreds of people, because she believed the public location would limit him. She had underestimated him. He had smiled. He had taken her hand and walked her to the elevator, and she had thought for a moment that they were going upstairs, back to the event, back to the crowd, and then the elevator had gone down, the B2 level, the service corridor, the pillar. She told this part very quietly and without embellishment, and Roman listened to all of it, and when she finished, there was a silence in the room that was not uncomfortable, but was heavy with the specific weight of information that changes the way a person sees a situation. How long were you there? He asked. An hour, maybe longer. I passed out for part of it. Roman was quiet. He looked at the window of the fourth-floor room, the Atlanta skyline visible through the gap in the curtains, the lights of the city laid out in their indifferent glitter. The drive, he said, the one in your coat. She looked at him with the careful expression again. Yes. Is it still there? The coat is in Cameron's coat check ticket upstairs. She stopped. I had it with me. He took the ticket. Roman absorbed this. Do you know which number? She did. She remembered it precisely, the way people under extreme stress sometimes retain small logistical details with perfect clarity while larger things blur. She told him the number. He picked up his phone and made one call. He spoke for under a minute. When he hung up, he looked at her. Someone will retrieve the coat. She stared at him. You can just do that? It's my hotel, he said. For the first time since he'd found her, something in her face did something other than calculate or endure. It wasn't quite relief. It was closer to the specific expression a person makes when they realize the ground beneath them is not as thin as they feared. Roman stood and moved toward the door. I'm going to have someone stay outside this room tonight. You'll hear a knock at 7 if you want breakfast. You don't have to answer it. He paused with his hand on the frame. You don't have to do anything tonight. Not decide anything, not call anyone, not plan anything. Tonight you just stop moving. She looked at him from across the room, her split lip, her closed eye, her hand still wrapped around the water glass. Why are you doing this? She said. The question was genuine, not suspicious, not challenging, genuinely inquiring, the way a person asks something when they have genuinely stopped understanding the motivations of other people. Roman considered the question seriously, which was the only way he knew how to consider things. I've spent a long time building things that serve my interests, he said. I'm not going to claim otherwise. But finding someone tied up in my building and walking away from it, that's not something I'm capable of. He paused. Maybe that's the most honest thing I can tell you. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. A small nod. But it was real. Roman left. He stood in the hallway and made 2 more calls. One to his security coordinator, one to his attorney, a different kind of attorney than Cameron Vale, one who operated in a quieter register but with considerably more precision. He spoke in short sentences. He gave specific instructions. Then he put his phone in his pocket and stood in the hallway for a moment and looked at the ceiling and thought about the coat check ticket and the flash drive and the lining of a coat and everything it might contain. And he thought about the man 6 floors above who was probably still at the podium, probably still smiling, probably still collecting applause like it was oxygen. He thought about the way Alara Voss had said the word knowing, the way she'd stopped mid-sentence and backed up and found that particular word instead of the easier one, like she was still fighting to be precise even when precision cost her something. He thought about what it meant that she had copied those files to a drive and hidden it in a coat and waited because she was not stupid and she knew she needed a plan. She already had one, Roman realized. She'd had one before he found her. Whatever Cameron Vale had done to her tonight, it had not ended the plan. It had only changed the timeline. He started walking toward the elevator. 6 floors above, the applause erupted again. The coat was retrieved within the hour. Roman's man, a quiet, efficient former logistics manager named Dell, who had worked for the Ashford Group for 11 years and understood that his role was to complete tasks without editorializing, delivered it to the 4th floor wrapped in a hotel garment bag. He slid it under the door as instructed. He heard no movement from inside the room. He reported this to Roman, who told him to stay at the end of the hallway until 6 in the morning. Roman drove home at midnight. His house was in a neighborhood that had been unremarkable 15 years ago and was now the kind of place where the homes didn't advertise their value, they implied it. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon and sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He searched Cameron Vale. 3 hours later, he had read enough to understand that what Alara had stumbled onto in that subfolder was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. A long, deliberate, systematically constructed pattern that had been operating for years behind the face of Cameron Vale's celebrated career. By 3 in the morning, Roman had made notes he would not share with anyone yet. He had also made a decision, though he hadn't exactly chosen the moment to make it. It had simply arrived the way certain decisions do, not as a choice, but as a recognition. He was going to help her dismantle this. He didn't examine why too closely. Examining the why of things had never been Roman Ashford's strongest instinct. He was better at identifying what needed to be done and then doing it. But somewhere beneath the tactical calculation, beneath the habit of efficiency and the preference for results over sentiment, there was something quieter. The image of a woman who had been through everything that had been done to her, who had still managed to copy files onto a drive, still managed to hide them in a coat lining, still managed to remember a coat check number precisely while sitting on a concrete floor with blood on her collar. That kind of mind didn't get destroyed by one man's cruelty, no matter how calculated that cruelty was. That kind of mind got dangerous when it finally had room to breathe. Roman closed his laptop at 3:15 and finished his bourbon and stood in the dark kitchen of his too quiet house and thought, Cameron Vale has no idea what he left alive in that basement. By morning, he would begin to understand exactly what was inside that flash drive and why Cameron Vale had already begun making phone calls to people who could make inconvenient women permanently disappear. The flash drive was smaller than Roman's thumbnail. It sat on the kitchen table in the morning light, next to his coffee cup and his unopened newspaper, and he looked at it the way he looked at most things that had the potential to be dangerous, carefully, and without touching it yet. Dell had confirmed the coat had been retrieved from the check station without incident. The attendant on duty was a 22-year-old part-time employee who had accepted Roman's operations manager's explanation, a mix-up with a guest's property, without question. The ticket had been surrendered. The coat had been transferred. Simple. The simplicity of it bothered Roman slightly, because simple things had a way of becoming complicated in retrospect, but there was nothing to be done about that now. He picked up the drive at 7:14 in the morning and took it to the secondary office on the 3rd floor of his house, the one without windows on the street side, the one with the encrypted hardline his IT contractor had installed 3 years ago for reasons that had nothing to do with this situation and everything to do with the general principle that information was the only currency that never devalued. He plugged it in. The drive contained 41 files. He read for 2 hours without stopping. By 9 o'clock, he had consumed the bourbon from last night as a kind of retroactive toast to the fact that what he was reading was worse than he had expected, and he had expected something fairly bad. He was not a man who underestimated badness. Cameron Vale had been running a secondary operation alongside his public advocacy work for at least 6 years. The mechanism was not complicated. The most effective corruptions rarely were. Cameron would take on high-profile abuse cases, cases with sympathetic survivors and culpable defendants, and he would use his position as the survivor's attorney to identify which defendants had significant financial resources and the specific motivation to keep certain outcomes from occurring. Then he would make contact through intermediaries, through cutouts, through the kind of careful distance that left no obvious fingerprints, and he would offer a service. The case would be managed. Evidence would be mishandled. Filings would be delayed past statutory deadlines. Witnesses would be contacted in ways that created second thoughts. And the men who paid him would walk away or receive reduced consequences or maintain custody arrangements they had no legal right to maintain, while Cameron Vale stood before cameras and spoke about the courage of survivors with the practiced gravity of a man who had convinced himself that his private transgressions were separate from his public virtue. The files documented 11 cases, 11 women, names, case numbers, outcome summaries, and beside each summary, the payment records. The accounts were in 3 different jurisdictions, layered through 2 holding companies and a charitable foundation that existed primarily on paper. It was not amateur work. Someone had constructed this with patience and with a thorough understanding of how financial trails could be obscured, but they had still been written down. That was the thing about men like Cameron Vale, Roman thought, closing one file and opening the next. They documented everything because documentation was how they maintained control, and they believed, with the specific arrogance of people who had never been caught, that the documentation would stay hidden because they were the ones hiding it. He was on his 3rd cup of coffee when his phone rang. It was Sandra. She called down, Sandra said. Sandra had arrived at the hotel at 7, as she did most mornings, and Roman had briefed her in 4 sentences before leaving. Sandra's primary gift was that she required very few sentences to understand a situation fully. Asked for a phone to make a call. We gave her one of the house phones, per your instructions. She called a woman named Priya Anand. I'm running the name now. The call lasted 11 minutes. Did we record it? A brief pause. Do you want us to? Roman considered. No, he said. That's her call to make, not mine. Another pause, and he could hear in the silence that Sandra thought this was either a principled position or a tactical error, and she wasn't sure which. She also asked about her own clothes. The ones she was wearing last night they're not in great condition. Have someone get her a bag from the boutique on 2. Her size is... He stopped. He didn't know her size. Ask her. And tell whoever goes to the boutique that this is not a selection process. It's her choosing what she wants. Understood. He hung up and looked at the drive and thought about Priya Anand and what Alara had said in those 11 minutes and what she was building. Even now, even a handful of hours after what had happened to her in that parking level. He thought about Cameron Vale waking up this morning in whatever bed he'd slept in after collecting his award. He thought about what Cameron had likely discovered when he'd gone to the coat check station. He picked up his phone again. Alara was sitting in the chair by the window when Roman arrived at the hotel room at 11:30. She had changed into clothes from the boutique, dark jeans, a plain gray sweater, and her hair was pulled back from her face. The swelling around her eye had deepened to a specific shade of purple that made Roman's jaw tighten once, briefly, before he controlled it. She had a hotel notepad on her knee and had been writing something, and she flipped the notepad face down when he knocked and entered, a gesture so automatic he almost didn't register it. Almost. You read it, she said. Not a question. Yes. All of it? All 41 files. She looked at him steadily. There were rings under her eyes that no amount of sleep would have fixed in one night, and her hands, he noticed, had a faint tremor that she was managing by keeping them in her lap. Then you know what he planned for me. Roman pulled the desk chair out and sat. Tell me in your own words. She didn't like the deflection. He could see that. She was not a woman who preferred to repeat herself. But she looked at him for a moment and then seemed to decide that his asking was not condescension. It was verification, the same instinct that had brought him to the parking level in person rather than relying on an engineer's report. There's a file, she said, labeled with my name. In it there's a set of documents, fabricated documents, that show I was an assistant in his practice from 18 months ago, that the whole time we were together, I was also his employee, and that I had direct involvement in managing case files. She stopped. Her voice had been level, and it stayed level, which cost her something visible. The documents are good. They look real. They're email chains with my name on them, correspondence, billing records. Someone built them carefully. Amat Satin. How long ago? The metadata on the oldest file goes back 14 months. She let that land. We'd been together for 4 months when he started building it. Roman was quiet. There's also a psychiatric evaluation, she said, dated 8 weeks ago. I never saw any psychiatrist, but the evaluation is signed and stamped and it describes me as... She stopped, picked the word carefully. Unstable, delusional, fixated on powerful men, prone to fabricating accusations. Her chin came up slightly. And there's a commitment order, pre-signed, undated. All it needs is a date and a physician's counter-signature. The room was very quiet. Outside, Atlanta was doing its mid-morning business, oblivious. He was going to use the gala, Roman said. I think so. I think telling him I was leaving accelerated whatever timeline he had. He needed me either silent or discredited. And if I was going to become a problem, making me disappear into a psychiatric hold while simultaneously producing documentation showing I was a compromised employee, she stopped. Nobody looks too hard at the claims of an unstable woman who was sleeping with her boss. Roman looked at her. The way she laid it out, the precision of it, the dry, almost clinical tone that she used to describe her own planned erasure, said something about what the last 18 months had done to her, and also, more importantly, what they had not done. The woman you called this morning, he said, Priya Anand. Something shifted in her expression, a small recalibration. You're thorough. I own the hotel. She's a forensic accountant, Alara said. She was 2 years ahead of me at Georgia State. We've stayed in touch. I trust her more than almost anyone I can think of right now, which is a brief pause. A short list. What did you tell her? That I needed her to look at some financial records and tell me if what I think I'm seeing is what I'm actually seeing. She met his eyes, and that I needed her to not tell anyone yet. She agreed? She's flying in from Savannah this afternoon. Roman nodded slowly. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. I have a problem, he said. Alara's expression shifted. There it was again. That rapid internal recalibration, the assessment running behind her eyes. Cameron's people called the hotel this morning, Roman said. One of his associates, a man named Thatcher, works as his communications director, called our front desk asking about a coat check item from last night. Said there had been a mix-up. Our desk referred it to operations. Operations referred it to Sandra. He paused. Sandra told him the item had been returned to its owner. Alara went very still. He knows. He knows the coat isn't where he left it. He doesn't know where it is now. He'll assume I have it. Yes, which means he'll move faster. Yes. Roman looked at her directly. How much time do you think you have before he does something? She thought about it seriously, chewing the inside of her cheek, a small unconscious gesture. Cameron doesn't make dramatic moves. He makes quiet ones. He won't come here himself. That's too visible. He'll use intermediaries. He'll probably try to establish my location first, then figure out who I've spoken to, then decide on his approach. She paused. Days, maybe, not weeks. Then we need to move faster than that. The we landed in the room and neither of them acknowledged it directly, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Priya Anand arrived at 3 p.m. She was a small, precise woman in her early 30s with the kind of face that didn't show much and the kind of eyes that were doing constant math. She embraced Alara at the door, briefly and firmly, and then stepped back and looked at the bruising with an expression that went flat and controlled in the way that people control things when feeling them fully would impair their function. Tell me everything, Priya said. She didn't mean the personal history. She meant the numbers. They sat at the table in the room, Roman, Alara, Priya, and Alara walked Priya through the files while Roman watched Priya's face and noted the specific ways her expression changed as she understood the architecture of what she was looking at. These holding companies, Priya said at one point, tapping one of the printed pages Roman had produced from the drive before coming to the hotel. The second-tier entity, Coastal Merit Solutions. I've seen this structure before. Not this company specifically, but this construction. It's designed to absorb payment and redistribute it as consulting fees. The consulting fees are deductible, which is almost poetic. She said it without any real poetry in her voice. Whoever built this had professional help. Babati. Can it be traced? Roman asked. Priya looked at him for the first time with the direct, assessing look that she'd been directing at the documents. Who are you, exactly? He found me, Ilar said. In the basement. Priya absorbed this. Are you a problem? Roman met her eyes. That depends on what you mean. Are you going to complicate what we're trying to do here for reasons that have to do with your own interests? My interest, Roman said, is seeing the information on that drive reach the right people before Cameron Vale manages to suppress it. Priya held his gaze for another 3 seconds. Then she went back to the documents. It can be traced, she said. It'll take time. I need access to some databases I can get through my firm's subscription services. I'll need to do it off the clock, on my personal machine, so there's no institutional footprint. She looked at Alara. I need a week. We may not have a week, Alara said. Then I'll do what I can in 3 days, and we'll see what we have. Roman stood. I'll arrange a secure workspace for you in this building. Private access, encrypted connection, no logs. Priya looked at him again. You can just do that? It's my hotel, Alara said, and something in her voice was almost dry, almost the edge of something that might become dark humor in a different version of this situation. The workspace was arranged within 2 hours. Roman put Priya on the 4th floor, 2 doors down from Alara, with a setup that his IT contractor assembled in person and verified before leaving. He put Dell on the floor overnight with instructions that were simple. No one came up who hadn't been cleared, and if anyone tried, Dell should call Roman before doing anything else. The second night was quieter than the first, but quiet in the way that pressure builds before something releases, the kind of quiet that isn't restful. Roman stayed at the hotel. He took a room on the 6th floor and sat by the window with his laptop and made calls he needed to make. Calls about his other properties and his other concerns, and the various obligations that didn't stop because he had absorbed someone else's emergency into his life. He handled them efficiently. Then he closed the laptop and sat with the city outside the window and thought about the 11 women whose names were in those files. He thought about one of them in particular, a name he had noticed during his early morning reading, Mara Ellison. Her case had a different quality than the others, a particular weight to it in the documentation, and something about the way Cameron's records referenced her suggested she was not simply a damaged case or a compromised outcome. She was missing. The case file noted a custody proceeding that had gone badly for her 18 months ago. Cameron's records showed a payment that dwarfed the others, 4 times the average, made to Coastal Merit Solutions within 2 weeks of the custody ruling. And then Mara Ellison simply ceased to appear in any subsequent documentation. No follow-up calls, no case updates, no forwarding address filed with Cameron's office, just the payment and then silence. Roman made a note. On the morning of the second day, Alara knocked on his door at 7:15. He opened it. She was holding 2 coffees from the hotel restaurant, paper cups, and she extended one without ceremony. He took it. He stepped back from the door. She came in. I need to know something, she said. She didn't sit down. She stood in the middle of the room with both hands wrapped around her cup, in the same way she'd held the water glass 2 nights ago, steadying rather than just holding. Are you doing this because you think you need to? Because of liability? Or because you think having something on Cameron Vale is useful to you in some way I'm not seeing? Roman looked at her. The question was precise and unadorned and deserved the same in return. No, he said. That's not an explanation. You want one. I want an honest one. He drank his coffee. Outside the window, a delivery truck was backing into the service entrance of the building across the street, its warning alarm a steady, indifferent beep in the morning air. I've done things in my career that were not clean, he said. I don't run a criminal operation, but I've operated in spaces where the rules were more flexible than they're supposed to be. I've made money in ways I didn't examine too carefully because examining them would have slowed me down. He paused. I'm not going to pretend I'm a good person who found you in a basement by accident. I'm a complicated person who found you in a basement by accident. The distinction matters to me, even if it doesn't matter to you. Alara studied him. But what I saw on that drive, he said, and what you told me about those 11 women and Mara Ellison. He stopped. Something in his voice shifted almost imperceptibly, the faintest change in texture. I have enough money that I don't need to extract anything from this situation. What I don't have enough of is... He looked for the word and didn't find it quickly, which was unusual. Whatever the opposite of regret is, whatever you feel when you did the right thing. Alara was quiet for a moment. She looked at him with something that was not yet trust, but was in the same neighborhood. Mara Ellison, she said. You found her in the files. Yes. I need to find her. She said it the way a person states an intention they've already decided on, not a question or a proposal. Not just the financial records, her, where she is, what happened to her. I know, Roman said. I'm already looking. What happened next didn't happen because of one thing. It happened because of several things landing in the same 24-hour window, which was either bad timing or the inevitable convergence of a situation that had been building for longer than any of them knew. At 2 in the afternoon, Priya found the secondary account. Not one of the 3 documented on the drive. A 4th account, one that hadn't appeared in Cameron's files because it predated them, a structure that had been operating for nearly 8 years and that connected Coastal Merit Solutions to a name that made Priya sit back in her chair and stare at the ceiling for 30 seconds before she called Alara into the room. The name was connected to a state judicial appointment, a judge who had presided over 3 of the 11 cases. Alara stood in the doorway of Priya's workspace and looked at the screen and felt the scale of what she was standing inside expand suddenly, the way a room expands when a wall is removed and you discover there was another room behind it, and then another. This is bigger than Cameron, she said. Yes, Priya said. If we go to the police, with what we know now, they'll pull the thread, and the thread is connected to someone who has relationships inside law enforcement in this city. Priya took her glasses off and pressed the bridge of her nose. I'm not saying we can't go to the police. I'm saying we need to know exactly how far this goes before we decide who we trust inside that system. Alara stood very still. Her mouth was tight. How long? Give me another day. At 4:15, Roman received a call from a contact he trusted about as much as he trusted anyone, which was partially and with specific reservations. The contact told him that Cameron Vale's communications director, the man named Thatcher, had been making inquiries with a private investigative firm that the Ashford Group had encountered twice before in litigation contexts. The firm was efficient and discreet and had a particular specialty in locating people who preferred not to be located. At 5 o'clock, Roman told Alara. She received this information standing in the hallway, and she went very quiet in the way that wasn't stillness, but was the opposite of it, was everything happening fast and internal where none of it showed. He's looking for me, she said. Yes. How long before they find this hotel? My name isn't on the guest register for any room on this floor, but a firm that good. He paused. 3 days. Maybe 2. She looked at the wall opposite. Her jaw was set. Her eyes had the quality of something that had finished being afraid and was now doing something else with the energy. Then we need to move, she said. Not run. Move. There's a difference. What's the difference? She looked at him. Running is when you don't know where you're going. Moving is when you do. She told him then, not all of it, because she was still working out the shape of it, but the essential direction. She had been thinking, she said, since the night in the basement, since before the night in the basement, since the moment she had copied those files onto the drive. Cameron's operation depended on invisibility, the moment it became visible. Not to one person, not to a private investigator, but to a room full of people who could not be individually managed or bought or silenced. The moment the machine was exposed to the kind of light that couldn't be controlled, it would collapse. Men like Cameron didn't survive exposure. Their entire architecture was built on the assumption that what they did would stay in the dark. He has an event, she said. The Atlanta Justice Awards, 6 weeks from now. Roman looked at her. He's receiving their highest honor, she said. Every major legal figure in this city will be there, media, politicians, people who have publicly staked their reputations on Cameron Vale being who he says he is. She paused. If the truth comes out there, in that room, in front of all of them at once, there's no version of that he recovers from. Roman was very still. That's your plan, he said. That's the direction of my plan, she said. The details need 6 weeks of work. He looked at her. This woman with the bruised eye and the split lip and the hotel notepad she'd flipped face down when he entered, still protecting her notes, still guarding the work even in the middle of everything. And he understood something about her that he hadn't had language for until that moment. She wasn't planning to expose Cameron Vale because she was angry. She wasn't planning it because she wanted him destroyed. Not exactly. She was planning it because 11 women had their lives damaged by a system that was supposed to protect them, and one of them was missing, and someone needed to account for that. And she had decided, in a basement with her wrists bound to a concrete pillar, that the someone was going to be her. "You'll need help," Roman said. "I know. My kind of help. Not the visible kind." "I know what kind," she said. And then his phone rang. It was Dell. Roman answered it and listened for 8 seconds and then said, "Hold," and lowered the phone and looked at Alara. "Cameron's investigator," he said. "He's in the lobby." The air in the hallway changed. Alara's expression did not break. It hardened, not with fear, but with the specific quality of a person who has been waiting for the thing they knew was coming and is now relieved, in a terrible way, that the waiting is over. "He got here faster than you thought," she said. "Yes." "Which means Cameron is more afraid than I thought." Roman looked at her steadily. "What do you want to do?" She looked back at him. Her shoulders were straight. Her hands, for the first time since he'd met her, were completely still. "I want you to call whoever you need to call," she said. "Because Priya found a connection to a sitting judge. And if Cameron's investigator is already in this building, then this stopped being just about me about 20 minutes ago. And we need to make sure the people who can actually end this are looking in the right direction before Cameron figures out exactly what we—" Roman made 2 calls in the time it took the elevator to reach the lobby level, and Dell received his instructions before the investigator had finished signing the guest register. The man's name, Roman's front desk coordinator confirmed in a clipped text message, was Greer. No first name given. He had presented a business card identifying him as a consultant with a firm called Meridian Advisory, a name Roman recognized from 2 prior encounters in litigation contexts, both of which had resolved in Roman's favor, and neither of which had left him feeling particularly clean about the process. Greer had asked, with the practiced pleasantness of a man who did this professionally, whether a woman matching Alara's description had been a guest at the hotel in the last 48 hours. The desk coordinator had told him she would need to escalate the inquiry to management. Greer was now sitting in one of the lobby chairs near the fountain, his coat folded over his knee, his phone in his hand, performing the patience of a man who was not patient. Roman put his own phone in his pocket and looked at Alara. She was still standing in the hallway with her shoulders straight and her hands still, and her expression doing that particular thing it did when she was moving fast internally and showing nothing externally. "He can't confirm you're here," Roman said. "Not yet, but he'll try other angles, credit card activity, your phone's last known location before you went dark, anyone you might have called who could be approached." "Priya," Alara said immediately. "Priya used her personal cell to call you this morning from the workspace." Alara's eyes closed briefly. 1 beat, 2, then open again. "He'll find her." "Possibly." "She needs to know." "Call her. Now. Tell her to stop using that phone." Alara was already moving toward Priya's room. Roman watched her go, and then took the stairs down rather than the elevator, because the elevator opened directly into the lobby, and he preferred, in moments that required a degree of control, to enter spaces from angles that gave him a second to read the room before the room read him. He came through the service corridor door at the far end of the lobby and crossed toward the fountain at a pace that was not hurried. Greer looked up from his phone when Roman was 6 feet away, and Roman could see the calculation happening in real time. "Who is this? Does he work here? Is he management? What's my angle?" Roman sat in the chair across from him without being invited. "Mr. Greer," Roman said. Greer's expression adjusted. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Roman Ashford. I own the hotel." Another adjustment, smaller this time, a professional compressing his reaction. "Mr. Ashford, I appreciate you coming down personally. I'm assisting a client with a private matter, and I was hoping—" "You're looking for a woman," Roman said. "You described her to my desk coordinator, 25, dark hair, possible facial injuries." Greer's pleasantness became more careful. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of my inquiry, but if you've had a guest matching—" My hotel's medical staff treated a guest last night for injuries consistent with an assault, Roman said. He said it flatly, without inflection, watching Greer's face with the attention he usually reserved for people across negotiating tables. I've already been in contact with my legal counsel regarding my obligations under Georgia's mandatory reporting statutes for hotels that become aware of potential crimes on their premises. The pleasantness evaporated, not entirely. Greer was too professional for that, but it thinned to the point of transparency. That's a significant step, Greer said. Yes, Roman said. It is. A silence sat between them. The fountain in the lobby made its steady, decorative sound. Two guests crossed behind Greer with luggage, oblivious. My client, Greer said carefully, has significant concerns about the well-being of the individual in question. There are mental health considerations that make independent action on her part potentially. I'm going to stop you there, Roman said. He leaned forward slightly. Because I want to be very clear about something, and I want you to relay it to your client with precision. The woman you're looking for is safe. She is receiving appropriate care. Any attempt to contact her, locate her, or interfere with her current situation will be documented and added to a file that already contains information your client would very much prefer remain private. Ishi, he paused. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Bashpuan. Greer was very still. His phone was face down on his knee. I understand what you're claiming. I'm not claiming anything, Roman said. I'm informing you. Another silence. Greer stood, unhurried, and put his coat back on. He was a compact man, maybe 50, with the kind of face that didn't read as threatening until you noticed that it also didn't read as anything else. Mr. Ashford, he said, I'd encourage you to think carefully about which side of this situation you want to be on. Roman looked up at him from the chair. He did not stand. I always do, he said. Greer left through the main entrance. Roman watched him go and then sat for another 30 seconds in the lobby chair, because standing up immediately would have been a performance for no one. And Roman had stopped performing things for no one at around the same age he'd stopped being impressed by charity galas. Then he stood and went back upstairs. The knock on Priya's door came at a bad time, which was the only time anything significant ever arrived. Priya had been 3 hours into the secondary account trace when Ilara appeared in her doorway with a look that Priya had learned in the past 24 hours to read as meaning something specific had gone wrong. Your phone, Ilara said. Priya looked at it. What about it? Turn it off. Take the SIM out if you can. Priya looked at her for 1 second, then reached for the phone and began doing exactly that. She was not someone who needed the full explanation before taking a reasonable precaution. How close? Close enough that Roman went downstairs to manage it directly. Priya set the phone and the SIM card on opposite sides of the desk. She looked at the screen in front of her, at the trail of financial connections she had been building with the patience of someone laying a mosaic one tile at a time. Then I need to tell you both something, she said, before anything else moves. Ilara came fully into the room and pulled the door closed behind her. Priya turned the laptop screen so Ilara could see it. The judicial connection I found yesterday, Judge Warren Pell. I told you his name was connected to the account structure. Yes. He's not just connected to it. Priya's voice had the quality it got when she was presenting findings she wished she hadn't found. Flat, almost drained of tone, because the tone would get in the way. He's the original architect. The Coastal Merit Solutions structure was built 8 years ago using a template that originates from a holding company in Judge Pell's name. Cameron didn't build this operation, Ilara. He was brought into it. She paused. Pell built it. Cameron was his instrument. Ilara stood absolutely still. The payments going into the shell accounts, Priya continued, they don't terminate with Cameron. They pass through him. He keeps a portion. It's not insignificant, but proportionally, it's a service fee. The bulk of the money moves upward, to Pell, and from Pell's structure outward to… She stopped, tapped the screen. I haven't fully traced the outward flow yet, but the connections I can see suggest other recipients, multiple. Some of them, based on the account geographies, are inside the state court system. Ilara's mouth had gone tight. How many judges? I can confirm 2. I think there are more. Roman came through the door without knocking, which was not something he usually did, and the fact that he didn't bother said something about the state of the situation. He read their faces and he read the screen and he said, "Tell me." Priya told him. She was concise, and she covered the essential facts in under 2 minutes, which Roman clearly appreciated because he didn't interrupt once. And when she finished, he stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the wall above her laptop. "If Pell is the architect," Roman said, "then he knows Cameron has been compromised the moment Cameron knows." "Yes," Priya said, "and Pell has resources Cameron doesn't. Significantly more based on what I'm seeing." Roman looked at Alara. She was still standing in the same position she'd been in since Priya started talking, which was the position of someone who had built a plan on a particular understanding of the terrain and had just been told the terrain was entirely different than they thought. "The awards event," Roman said quietly. "I know," Alara said. "Exposing Cameron at the Justice Awards doesn't end this. Not if Pell is sitting in that room." "I know. It accelerates it. Pell moves the moment Cameron is exposed. Everything Cameron holds gets transferred or destroyed within—" "I know," Alara said. The repetition was not impatience. It was her working through something, using the acknowledgement as a metronome while her mind moved. "The plan doesn't work the way I built it. I understand that." She was quiet for a moment. "But what I don't understand is how Pell didn't appear anywhere in Cameron's files. 41 files, detailed records. Cameron documented everything." Priya and Roman both looked at her. "He documented his operation," Alara said. "But he didn't document Pell, which means either Cameron didn't know the full extent of the architecture above him." She stopped. "Or the files I found were meant to be found." The room went very quiet. "Say that again," Roman said. "The laptop," Alara said. "The subfolder. Cameron kept it behind a secondary password, but I found it in under an hour. I'm not a forensic analyst. I'm not a hacker. I found it because—" She stopped again, pressed her fingers against her mouth briefly, a gesture of intense concentration. "He used my birthday as the password. The secondary password was my birthday." No one spoke. "He gave me access," she said. "Not consciously, maybe. Not as an explicit decision, but he used a password I could find because some part of him—" She shook her head. "Or because someone told him to, someone who wanted those specific files to surface." Priya leaned back in her chair. "Pell is cleaning house. Cameron became a liability," Roman said slowly. "Whatever Cameron did that made him useful to Pell for 6 years, he's now a problem. And the cleanest way to eliminate a problem is to let it eliminate itself." "He was going to let me expose Cameron," Alara said. The sound of it in her own voice seemed to hit her physically. A small shift in her expression, there and gone. "The flash drive, the files, the plan to frame me. Pell let all of that sit in Cameron's laptop behind a password I could find because if Cameron went down, took the fall publicly, Pell's own involvement would be buried under the noise of Cameron's prosecution. The fourth account," Priya said, "the one connecting to Pell, it doesn't appear on the drive." "Because Pell made sure it wouldn't," Roman said. "Cameron's files expose Cameron. They don't expose Pell. They were always meant to surface eventually." The architecture of it, Roman thought, was almost elegant in the way that certain truly vicious things were almost elegant, the compressed efficiency of cruelty that had been engineered with patience and foresight. He had encountered people who operated this way before. He had not often encountered someone who did it quite so thoroughly. Alara moved to the window. She stood with her back to both of them, looking at the Atlanta skyline, and neither Roman nor Priya spoke, because there was nothing productive to say in the 30 seconds it took her to fully absorb what they had just determined. When she turned around, her face had changed, not broken. Changed. "Mara Ellison," she said. Roman met her eyes. "Tell me what you found," she said. He had found it that morning. During his pre-dawn search through the secondary databases, his investigative contact could access through channels Roman preferred not to examine in detail. He had found it, and he had held the information for the right moment, and he understood now that the right moment had arrived whether he had chosen it or not. "She's alive," he said. "She's in a private care facility outside Athens, Georgia, a place called Stillwater Recovery. It's licensed as a voluntary residential mental health program, but the admission records show she was placed there under a third-party consent arrangement." He paused. "The consent was authorized by her abuser, who had obtained emergency guardianship through a court order. Which court? Priya asked. Pell's court, Roman said. Ilara's eyes did something then that Roman had not seen from her in the 2 days he'd known her. They filled. Not with tears that fell. She contained that, or her body did it for her through some mechanism of control he recognized from people who had trained themselves to hold things in because releasing them had historically not been safe. But the brightness was there, unmistakable. She's been there for 16 months, Roman said, against her will. Legally invisible, because the guardianship order classified her as incompetent to make independent decisions, and the classification was signed by Pell. Ilara sat down on the edge of the bed. The motion was controlled, but it was also the motion of someone whose legs had made a decision the rest of them hadn't authorized yet. She doesn't know any of this, Ilara said. It wasn't a question. No. She's been in that facility for 16 months thinking she has no options because a court told her she didn't have any. Yes. Priya was looking at her laptop screen. She was not looking at either of them, which was the way Priya gave people privacy in a room she was occupying, and Roman noted that this was a particular kind of consideration. Ilara sat on the edge of the bed for another moment. Then she pressed her palms flat against her thighs, one specific downward pressure, and she breathed, in, out. The kind of breathing that was not calm but was deliberate, which was different. Everything changes, she said. Yes, Roman said. This isn't about the awards event anymore. This isn't about Cameron anymore. This is about a sitting judge who has been using his court for 8 years to imprison women who tried to get free. She looked up at Roman. If we go public with what we have, Pell moves, Roman said. He has enough warning time to destroy the financial connections, and Mara disappears again, this time somewhere we can't find her. If we go to law enforcement, Pell has relationships inside the department. I don't know which relationships or how deep they go. We'd need to be certain of who we were handing this to before we handed it to anyone. He paused. There are people in the federal system who operate outside Pell's reach, but making contact with them in a way that doesn't immediately surface back to Pell requires time, Ilara said, which Cameron's investigator just told us we don't have. Yes, the silence in the room was the specific silence of a plan collapsing. Priya closed her laptop. She did it slowly, with the deliberate motion of someone making a decision about what they were and were not going to do next. There's something I need to tell you, she said. Something I should have said when I first sat down today. Both Roman and Ilara looked at her. Priya's face was doing something complicated. She was not a person whose face did complicated things easily, which made this more significant rather than less. I called my partner last night, she said. Marcus. I told him where I was and what I was doing. Not the details, but enough. She stopped. Marcus is a good person, and he had no reason to. I didn't think it was a risk. I just needed someone to know where I was. A beat of silence. Marcus plays tennis on Thursday mornings, Priya said. His regular partner is a man named Cliff Warrington. Warrington is a senior partner at a firm that does appellate work. She paused. He clerked for Warren Pell 12 years ago. The silence became a different kind of silence. Ilara looked at Priya without expression. Then she looked at the SIM card sitting on the far side of the desk. Then she looked at Priya again. How long ago did you call Marcus? She said. Last night, around 10. And this morning Greer was in the lobby. Ilara's voice was flat, not accusatory. Flat in the way that ground is flat after something has moved through it. It wasn't the coat check. It wasn't my phone location. She stopped. It was Marcus. Priya's face had gone the color of someone who has understood the thing they did and cannot undo it. I know you didn't, Ilara said. I know. The flatness held. But he knows we're here. He's known since this morning. And whatever Greer told Cameron downstairs, Cameron told Pell. Roman was already on his phone. He walked to the window and spoke in a low, rapid voice, and Ilara could hear from the single-sided conversation that he was giving instructions to someone she hadn't met. Instructions that involved movement and timing, and the word tonight delivered twice with particular emphasis. When he hung up, he turned to face them both. We have to move, he said. Not in 3 days. Tonight. Move where? Priya asked. I have a property outside the city. Private road, no shared utilities, one access point. If Pell's people are going to act, they'll do it in the next 12 hours while they believe they still have a location advantage. He looked at Alara. We take everything Priya has, we go there, and we spend the next 72 hours building a case that is airtight enough to hand to someone I trust at the federal level. Someone who owes me a conversation and who operates entirely outside Pell's network. Matis Uchishar said. You have someone like that? Priya said. I have someone like that, Roman said. It was not a boast. It was the straightforward declaration of a man who had spent many years cultivating the right relationships for exactly the kind of situation where the normal channels were contaminated. Alara stood up from the bed. She went to the window and stood beside Roman without looking at him, looking instead at the city that had, for the past 8 years, been quietly operated in part by a man who sat in a courtroom and wore a robe and sent women to facilities where their legal existence was managed into oblivion. Mara first, she said. Whatever we do, however we do it, Mara comes out of that facility before Cameron or Pell knows we're moving. If we go public and she's still there, Pell will bury her so deep we'll never— I know, Roman said, so she comes out first. Getting her out of a legally sanctioned facility with an active guardianship order is not a simple— I didn't ask if it was simple, Alara said. She turned and looked at him, and what was in her face was not anger at Roman, and was not desperation, and was not the particular blankness of someone who had given up. It was something harder than all of those things, and quieter. I asked if it could be done. Roman looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said, it can be done. Then we do it. She went to gather her things, which were few because she had arrived here with almost nothing, and she moved with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided that the version of herself who needed to be careful and protected and given time to recover was going to have to wait because there was a woman in a facility outside Athens who had been waiting 16 months, and there was a judge who had signed the order that put her there, and the plan had changed, but the destination had not. Priya was repacking her work onto a single encrypted drive, her movements precise and economical. She had not apologized again for Marcus, which Roman had noted and respected. The apology had been made. Making it twice would have been for Priya's comfort, not Ilara's, and Priya understood that distinction. Roman stood in the doorway and made 2 more calls. On the second call, his voice dropped lower than Alara had heard it before, and he used 3 words she didn't catch, and whatever response he received made him close his eyes for exactly 2 seconds before opening them again and saying, When? He listened. He said, That's too soon. He listened again, his jaw tightened, then he said, Understood, and ended the call. He stood in the doorway with his phone in his hand, and his expression had changed in a way that Alara, who had been watching him for 2 days and had developed a reasonable working map of his expressions, did not recognize. It was not the controlled flatness of his default state. It was something more exposed than that, something that arrived and departed in the space of a breath before the control returned. What? She said. Roman looked at her. He looked at Priya. He looked back at Alara. My contact at the federal level, he said. The one I said I trusted. Yes? He's already been contacted, Roman said, by Cameron Vale's attorney 2 hours ago. The air in the room changed in a way that was physical. Cameron got to him first, Alara said. Cameron didn't, Roman said. Pell did. He paused. My contact took the meeting. He hasn't committed to anything, and he called me the moment it was over, which is why I still trust him. But Pell knows that I have a federal contact, which means Pell has been watching me for longer than he's been watching you. He stopped. His voice was entirely level. Which means this is not about Cameron's investigator finding your location through Priya's phone call. That may be how they found the hotel, but Pell knew I was involved before Greer walked in downstairs. Alara stood with this information the way you stand with something you cannot put down. He's been watching you, she said, which means he knows what you have access to, which means he knows about the federal contact. She stopped. He's not trying to suppress the evidence. He's not trying to suppress the evidence. He's trying to suppress the people who can authenticate it. The words finished themselves in Alara's mind before she said them aloud, and the moment they fully formed, she understood the specific danger they were in with a clarity that was almost physical, like a change in air pressure before a storm. If the evidence surfaces without someone credible to stand behind it, she said, it's just documents. Fabricated documents are Cameron's specialty. Without a forensic accountant and a credible witness and a federal contact willing to receive it, the drive is paper. Yes, Roman said. So he's not coming after the drive. He's coming after Priya. He's coming after your contact. And he's coming after me. She paused. In that order, probably, because I'm the witness. Priya is the analyst. And your contact is the only federal entry point that doesn't run through someone Pell already owns. Roman was looking at her with the expression she had learned meant he was several steps ahead and was deciding how much of those steps to share at once. My contact's name is Aldrin, Harrison Aldrin. He's a deputy director in the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI's Atlanta field office. He and I have a history that is complicated, but the complication runs in both directions, which is why he called me after Pell's meeting rather than not calling. What did Pell offer him? Priya asked. She had stopped packing. She was standing with the encrypted drive in her hand, listening with the stillness of someone who needed complete information before deciding their next move. I didn't ask, Roman said. It doesn't matter what Pell offered him. What matters is that Aldrin told me about the meeting, which means he hasn't committed, which means there's a window. He looked at his watch. A short one. How short? Pell will expect an answer from Aldrin by morning. If Aldrin doesn't give him one, Pell will assume he's a problem instead of an asset, and he'll move accordingly. Roman's jaw set. We need to get to Aldrin tonight, in person, with everything Priya has, and we need to give him something Pell can't counteroffer. Which is what? Elara said. Mara Ellison, Roman said. Alive, free, and able to testify. Not documents, not financial records. A living person who was imprisoned by a court order that Pell signed fraudulently, who can stand in front of a federal investigator and describe in specific detail what was done to her and by whose authority. He stopped. Documents can be disputed. A person standing in a room cannot be. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. This one had direction. Stillwater Recovery, Elara said. You said it's outside Athens. 70 miles. How many people are working the facility tonight? I don't have a staff manifest. Can you get one? Roman looked at her steadily. I can get a layout, I can get a sense of overnight security protocols. But I want to be clear about what you're proposing. I'm proposing we go get her, Elara said. Tonight. Before Pell makes his next move. We get Mara out, we take her directly to Aldrin, and we give him the full package, the drive, Priya's trace work, and a living witness, in one sitting. She paused. Is there a version of this where we don't do that and it ends well? Roman took a breath, released it. No. Then we need to leave in the next hour. They moved with the compressed efficiency of people who understood that speed and precision were now the same thing. Priya finished transferring her work to the encrypted drive and produced, from the inner pocket of her bag, a second drive she handed to Roman without explanation. He understood without asking that it was a backup and put it in his inside pocket. Elara took the notepad she had been writing on since the first morning and folded it to a specific page and put it in the pocket of the jacket Roman's hotel boutique had provided. Because what was on that page was the timeline she had been building in her head for days, and she was not leaving it behind. Dell met them in the service corridor with a car that was not registered to the Ashford Group, and whose plates Roman said nothing more about. Dell drove. Roman sat in the front. Elara and Priya sat in the back, and Priya opened her laptop and worked by the light of the screen, cross-referencing the Stillwater facility's public records with the licensing database she had accessed through her firm's system that morning, building a picture of the overnight protocols from the publicly available regulatory inspection reports. Licensed for 40 residents, Priya said. Last inspection noted 2 overnight staff on weeknights. Security system is camera-based, no mention of guards. She paused. But that's the public face. Facilities that operate under private guardianship arrangements frequently have additional security that doesn't appear in regulatory filings. Meaning we don't know what we're walking into, Dell said from the front, his first words since they'd entered the car. Meaning we go in with that assumption, Roman said. The drive to Athens took 68 minutes. Dell drove at a speed that was slightly above the limit and entirely steady, the kind of driving that covered ground without attracting attention, and the city gave way to suburban sprawl and then to the looser, darker landscape of rural Georgia at night, the trees pressing close to the road and the sky above them clear and very cold. Elara sat with her shoulder against the door and watched the dark go past and let her mind run the sequence of what needed to happen in what order. The way she had trained herself to think about complicated things, not as a single problem, but as a series of smaller problems, each with a discrete solution, each building toward the larger outcome. Get to Stillwater. Locate Mara. Establish that Mara was coherent and capable of understanding her situation. Explain to Mara that the guardianship order was fraudulent. Get Mara out of the facility voluntarily. The voluntary piece mattered, because forcing someone from a licensed facility created its own legal complications that would give Pell an angle and transport her to Aldrin. The voluntary piece was the one she couldn't plan around. She didn't know Mara. Mara had been inside a facility for 16 months under conditions designed to make her doubt her own perceptions, which was a specific kind of damage that didn't heal on command. There was no guarantee that Mara would look at a stranger who appeared in the middle of the night and said your court order was fraudulent and you can leave and choose to walk out. She might not believe it. She might be too frightened. She might have been medicated into a state where the choice couldn't be made clearly. Elara didn't know, and the not knowing was the part she couldn't think away. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window and breathed. Stillwater Recovery occupied what had originally been a private estate, a main house and 2 outbuildings on 11 acres of land set back from a state road behind a gate with an intercom. The gate was closed when Dell pulled up at 11:47. The intercom produced a response within 30 seconds, a tired female voice identifying herself as the night intake coordinator. Roman leaned across Dell and spoke into the intercom. He identified himself as the attorney for a family member of a resident, Amara Ellison, and indicated that there had been a legal development in the guardianship case that required immediate notification under the facility's legal obligation protocols. He used the specific language of someone who knew what the legal obligation protocols were, which he had gotten from Priya during the drive, which Priya had found in the facility's public compliance filings. The intercom was silent for 40 seconds. Then, "I'll need to verify with our administrator." "Of course," Roman said. "I'll wait." They waited 4 minutes. Then the gate opened. Dell parked on the gravel drive in front of the main house. The building had the particular look of an institution that was trying not to look like one. Warm lighting in the windows, carefully maintained landscaping, a front door that was designed to suggest welcome rather than containment. A woman in her mid-40s met them at the door, the night administrator, her expression carrying the specific wariness of someone who had been woken by something irregular and had not yet decided how to categorize it. Roman presented the situation with measured authority. He had documentation, a legal brief he had his attorney prepare and transmit to his phone during the drive. Something that looked official enough in a cursory examination to establish plausibility without being legally binding in a way that would create problems later. The administrator read it on Roman's phone, her eyes moving carefully over the language. "This is highly irregular," she said. "I understand," Roman said. "The guardianship irregularities I'm referencing are also highly irregular, which is why we're here at this hour rather than waiting for business hours. If you prefer, I can place a call to the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities tonight and have a duty officer contact you within the hour to confirm the legal situation. But the timeline on the underlying matter is such that—" "I'll need to wake her," the administrator said, "and she'll need to agree to speak with you." "That's exactly what we're asking for," Roman said. They were shown to a small reception room off the main corridor. The administrator left them there with a younger staff member who stood near the door with the watchful, uncertain expression of someone who had been told to observe without being told what they were observing for. Elara sat. Priya sat. Roman stood near the window. Dell remained outside with the car. They waited 11 minutes. Mara Ellison came through the door in a robe over pajamas, her feet in facility-issued slippers, her hair uncombed, and her face carrying the particular expression of someone who had been in an institutionalized setting long enough that unexpected events registered first as threat rather than possibility. She was 31. She looked older in the specific way that people who have been under sustained psychological pressure look older. Not in their features, but in their eyes. A wearing down that happened behind the face rather than on it. She stopped inside the door and looked at the 3 strangers in the room. The staff member said, These people say they're here about your case, Mara. You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to. Mara looked at Alara. Something happened in that look. Alara didn't know what Mara saw. She was aware of her own bruising, still visible, the healing split lip, the careful way she held herself that probably communicated its own history to someone who had been paying attention to the way damaged people carry themselves for 16 months. Whatever Mara saw, the threat assessment in her eyes shifted, not to trust, but to something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. The specific recognition of one kind of person seeing another. Sit down, Mara said. She said it to all of them, but she was looking at Alara. They sat. Alara spoke. She spoke for 12 minutes without interruption, and she did not use legal language, and she did not soften what she was saying, and she did not perform compassion, because performing compassion to someone who had been in this place for 16 months would have been an insult to them both. She told Mara what she knew. The guardianship order, Pell's signature, the connection to Cameron Vale, the financial records, the 11 cases. She told Mara that the order placing her here had been obtained fraudulently and that the facility's legal basis for keeping her was built on a document that was going to be challenged in federal court within the next 72 hours. Mara sat through all of it with her hands folded in her lap and her face arranged in an expression that was not blank. It was listening, the specific quality of someone who has had to learn the difference between listening and reacting because reacting too quickly in this place had consequences. When Alara finished, the room was quiet. My children, Mara said. Custody records show your ex-husband was granted full custody through Judge Pell's court 8 months ago, Alara said. That order is part of the same fraudulent structure. When the guardianship falls, the custody order can be challenged. Can be, Mara said. Her voice was even. That's not the same as will be. No, Alara said. It's not. I won't tell you I can promise you an outcome. I can tell you what the evidence shows, and I can tell you what we're going to do with it. What you decide is yours to make. Mara looked at Roman. Who are you? Someone helping, Roman said. Why? The question had the same quality as when Alara had asked it. Genuine, not suspicious. The inquiry of someone who had learned that motivations were rarely what they appeared and needed to map them before deciding anything. Because the judge who signed your commitment order has been running a system that puts women in places like this one, Roman said. And I have the resources to help stop it, and I'm using them. Mara looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at the staff member by the door. Then she looked at her own hands. If I leave, she said, and whatever you're doing doesn't work, then you're out of this facility, Alara said. Regardless of what else happens, you are not coming back here. You can promise that? I can promise that the moment you walk out of this building, voluntarily, the fraudulent guardianship order becomes a different kind of legal problem than it is right now. You become a person who left of her own choice rather than a resident. The burden of proof shifts. She paused. I'm not a lawyer, but Priya is a forensic accountant who has spent 3 days tracing the financial architecture of what was done to you, and Roman has a federal contact who will receive everything we have tonight if you come with us. Alara stopped. I know you have no reason to trust us. I know you've been in this room for 16 months, and every person who said they were trying to help either couldn't or didn't. I know that. She held Mara's gaze. I'm asking you to walk out of this building tonight. I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I'm asking you to make a choice, because for 16 months, someone else has been making yours. Mara was quiet for 30 seconds. Her hands unfolded from her lap. Let me get my shoes, she said. They were back in the car at 12:51 in the morning. Mara sat between Alara and Priya in the back seat. She had taken nothing from her room except a photograph that she held in both hands in her lap, and Alara did not ask what it was, because she could see from the angle that it was 2 children, and asking would have been the kind of cruelty that looked like kindness. Dell drove back toward Atlanta. Roman called Aldrin from the front seat, and the call was short. 3 sentences from Roman, a pause, 2 sentences from the other end that Alara couldn't hear, and then Roman said, 1 hour, and ended the call. He turned to look at all 3 of them from the front seat. He'll meet us, he said. Where? Priya asked. Roman gave an address that meant nothing to Alara, but that Dell acknowledged with a slight nod, and the car changed direction on the highway. the Atlanta skyline emerging ahead of them as a low orange glow against the cold dark. Mara was looking at the photograph in her hands. She had not spoken since getting in the car. Alara sat beside her without touching her and without filling the silence with anything, because the silence was what Mara needed, and understanding what people needed without needing them to ask for it was the one thing Alara had learned from 18 months of having her own needs managed by someone who understood them only well enough to use them. Priya opened her laptop and spent the drive compiling the final package, organizing the financial trace into a sequence that a federal investigator unfamiliar with the case could follow from the first account to the last, annotating the connections clearly and attaching the relevant documents from the drive in the order that built the argument most efficiently. Her fingers moved quickly and without hesitation. She had done this kind of work professionally for 7 years, and the quality of it showed in the precision of the organization. At 1:38 in the morning, Dell pulled into the parking structure of an office building in Midtown that Roman owned through a subsidiary. The building was empty at this hour. They took the elevator to the 5th floor. Harrison Aldrin was already there. He was a broad-shouldered black man in his late 40s, wearing a gray sweater and dark pants, the clothing of someone who had been called in the middle of the night and had not pretended otherwise. He had the careful, assessing presence of a career investigator, eyes that moved across each person entering the room and filed what they found without commenting on it. He looked at Roman when they entered, and something passed between them that was the whole history of their complicated relationship compressed into a glance. Then he looked at Mara. Something changed in his expression, just slightly. The professional assessment shifted into something more human. "Ms. Ellison," he said. Mara looked at him. "You know who I am." "Your name appeared in a case review I conducted 18 months ago," Aldrin said. "I flagged it for follow-up. The follow-up was—" He stopped. His mouth tightened. "Redirected by my supervisor, who I now understand has a relationship with Judge Pell that I did not understand at the time." The room absorbed this. "You knew," Roman said. It was not an accusation. It was the statement of someone confirming something they had suspected. "I knew something was wrong with the Ellison case closure," Aldrin said. "I didn't know what. I was told to move on. I moved on." He looked at Mara. "I am sorry for that." Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the same small, controlled nod Alara had seen her own face make on the first night, the careful lowering of one specific guard among many. Priya put the laptop on the conference table and walked Aldrin through the financial trace in 22 minutes. Aldrin did not interrupt once. He asked 4 questions, all of them precise, all of them indicating that he was following the architecture of the scheme accurately. When Priya finished, he sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment in the particular way of someone calculating the distance between what they were seeing and what they could actually do with it. "The supervisor who redirected the Ellison case follow-up," he said. "I can connect him to Pell through the information here. That gives me grounds for an independent filing, outside the normal chain, directly to the Financial Crimes Division's Oversight Office." He paused. "If I do that tonight, it becomes a matter of federal record before Pell is aware it's happening. He can't suppress a filing that's already in the system." "How long does the filing take?" Roman asked. "If I do it from here, on a secure federal uplink that I can access remotely, 2 hours." "Then do it now," Alara said. Aldrin looked at her. It was the first time he had looked at her directly rather than at the documents or at Roman, and his gaze registered the bruising and the healing lip and did not look away from it the way some people looked away, out of discomfort or politeness. "Who did that?" he asked. "Cameron Vale," she said. "Who you'll find in the first 12 files on that drive." Aldrin was quiet for a moment. Then he opened his bag and produced a laptop of his own and connected it to a device Roman had arranged to be in the room. A secured hotspot that ran through an encrypted government-adjacent network. Another piece of Roman's infrastructure that Alara had stopped questioning because it was consistently exactly what they needed at exactly the moment they needed it. He began to work. The room was very quiet. Priya sat with her own laptop, cross-referencing in case Aldrin had questions. Roman stood near the window. Mara sat in a chair at the end of the table with the photograph in her hands and her eyes on the middle distance, doing whatever interior work she needed to do in the space between the facility she had left an hour ago and the life she was going to begin reconstructing. Alara stood by the wall. 40 minutes into Aldrin's work, her phone, The new one Roman had given her, registered to nothing that connected back to her name, buzzed. She looked at it. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. 4 words. I know where you are. She stared at the message for 3 seconds. Then she crossed to Roman and showed him the screen without speaking. Roman looked at it. Something moved across his face and was controlled before it fully surfaced. He took the phone from her hand and walked to the corner of the room and made a call that lasted 45 seconds. And when he came back, his expression had the specific quality of a situation that had been anticipated and was now arriving ahead of schedule. Pell made his decision, Roman said, low enough that only she could hear. He's not waiting for Aldrin's answer. He's moving now. Here, she said. A car was logged entering this building's parking structure 7 minutes ago. Dell is monitoring the ground level. He paused. They don't know which floor, but they'll work upward. Alara looked at Aldrin's back, at his hands moving across the keyboard, at the progress bar on the screen that was 40% complete on a filing that would take another 80 minutes to finish. She looked at Mara, who was sitting at the end of the table with a photograph of her children and 16 months of wrongful imprisonment and a room full of strangers who had told her that tonight something was going to change. She thought about what she'd said in the car, that the plan had changed but the destination had not. She walked back to the wall. She picked up her jacket. She put it on. Roman watched her. What are you doing? Buying 80 minutes, she said. How? She looked at him, and what was in her face was not bravado and was not performance, and was not the particular recklessness of someone who had stopped caring what happened to them. It was something more precise and more dangerous than any of those things. Cameron is in that car, she said, or he sent someone who can reach him, and Cameron wants to make sure I don't finish what I started. She paused. But Cameron doesn't know what Aldrin is filing. He doesn't know about Priya's trace. He doesn't know about Mara. The only thing he knows is that I have the drive and I'm somewhere in this building. She looked at Roman steadily. So I go down there. I let him see me. I keep him occupied in this building, in conversation or confrontation or whatever it becomes, for 80 minutes. She stopped. After the filing completes, it doesn't matter what happens next. Pell can't suppress a federal filing. The case is already in the system. Roman's expression did not change, but something in it became very still. You're using yourself as the delay, he said. Yes. If Cameron decides that the delay isn't worth the risk, then you send Dell, she said, and you don't take more than 4 minutes to decide to do it. Roman looked at her for a long moment. She could see him running the calculation, the risk to her, the alternative risks if Pell's people found the floor before the filing completed, the probability of each scenario, the variable he couldn't account for, which was Cameron Vale's specific level of desperation tonight. He won't hurt you here, Roman said. Not a reassurance, an analysis. Too visible, too many cameras. Whatever he's planning, it's not physical, not in a building with a federal agent on the 5th floor. No, she agreed. It's not. He'll want to talk, Roman said. He'll think he can still manage this. I know. She paused. Let him think that. Roman looked at her for one more second. Then he stepped back. 4 minutes, he said. 4 minutes, she said. She took the elevator down alone. The lobby of the building was empty and dim, the overnight security lighting turning everything a shade of gray that made the space feel larger and more exposed than it did in daylight. Her footsteps on the polished floor were the only sound as she crossed from the elevator to the center of the lobby, and she stopped there and waited, because whatever was coming would come through the parking structure entrance or through the main doors, and either way, she would see it first. She waited. Her hands were in her jacket pockets. Her heartbeat was elevated, and she was aware of it without being governed by it, the way she had learned to be aware of her own fear without letting it steer, a skill she had developed over 18 months of living with a man who could smell fear and used it as a compass. The parking structure door opened. Cameron Vale stepped through it. He was wearing the same suit he'd worn to the gala, minus the tie, and his expression had none of the curated composure she had spent 18 months cataloging. He looked like a man who had been awake for most of the last 48 hours running a scenario that kept producing outcomes he hadn't planned for, and the strain of it was on him the way weather is on a building, visible in the small structural things, the set of his shoulders, the specific tightness around his eyes. He saw her and he stopped. They looked at each other across the empty lobby. "Alara," he said. His voice was controlled. That was the one thing he could still maintain, she noticed. The voice. "Cameron?" she said. He walked toward her slowly. She didn't move. He stopped 8 feet away, which was a specific distance, close enough for conversation, far enough to maintain the impression that this was a negotiation rather than anything else. "You need to think about what you're doing," he said. "I have been," she said, "for about 48 hours. The information you have, whatever you think it shows—" "I know what it shows," she said. "Priya knows what it shows. And in approximately 70 minutes, the relevant federal authorities are going to know what it shows." Something moved through his face. A rapid recalculation. "You're stalling," he said. "Yes," she said. He absorbed the honesty of it. That had always been one of his particular frustrations with her. That she had a tendency toward directness that made certain kinds of manipulation less effective. He had spent 18 months working around it. "It won't matter," he said. "Whatever you file tonight, there are people in position to manage the response. You're not fighting me, Alara. You don't understand who you're actually fighting." "Pell," she said. Another recalculation. Faster this time and less controlled. "Where did you Priya's very good," Alara said. "Better than whatever analyst Pell used to build the financial structure. She found the 4th account in 36 hours. She paused. "And Mara Ellison is upstairs." Cameron went very still. "She walked out of Stillwater tonight," Alara said. "Voluntarily. She's with Harrison Aldrin right now, and she's been talking for the last hour." This last part was not precisely true, but it was close enough to what was happening that it did the work she needed it to do, which was to show Cameron Vale that the thing he believed was manageable had already exceeded the boundaries of manageability before he arrived in this lobby. Cameron's jaw tightened. When he spoke, the controlled voice had developed a seam. "You don't understand what Pell will do." "I think I have a reasonable idea. Not just to you, to everyone in this building, to the people helping you, to that accountant friend of yours, and whoever Ashford is, and—" "Aldrin's filing completes in 63 minutes, Alara said. "After that, Pell's operation is a matter of federal record. Whatever he does after that doesn't change what's already in the system." She looked at Cameron. "So you have 63 minutes to decide whether you want to be the man who stood in a lobby while a federal case was built against him, or the man who called his attorney and started—" Cameron Vale stood in the lobby for 11 seconds without speaking. Alara counted them. Not because she was nervous, but because she had learned, in 18 months of living with him, that the length of his silences was diagnostic. 3 seconds meant he was forming a response. 6 meant he was recalculating. 11 meant the calculation had produced an outcome he hadn't anticipated, and he was deciding whether to accept the outcome or refuse it. At second 12, he spoke. "You're asking me to cooperate," he said. "I'm telling you what the next 62 minutes look like," she said. "What you do with that information is your decision." He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face in 18 months, which was the expression of a man who had run out of moves and knew it, and hadn't yet decided how to hold himself in the absence of them. It made him look older. It made him look like the person he actually was underneath the curated performance, which was someone who had chosen, at some specific point in his life, to build himself entirely out of what other people could be made to believe rather than what was real, and who was now standing in a lobby at 2 in the morning with the architecture of that choice collapsing around him. "Pell will destroy you," Cameron said, "even if the filing completes. He has a network that is currently being documented in a federal filing," Alara said. "The network is his power. Once it's in the system, it's evidence, not power." "You don't know Pell." "I know what Priya found," she said. "And I know what Mara Ellison is telling Aldrin right now." She paused. "And I know that you knew Mara was in that facility." The seam in his voice widened. "I didn't—" "Don't," she said. It was not loud. It was the specific quiet of someone who had finished being lied to and found the experience of being lied to less distressing than it used to be, because the capacity to be wounded by a particular weapon diminished with exposure. "I have the payment records. 14 days after Mara's custody ruling, $420,000 moved through Coastal Merit Solutions. I know what that payment was for." Cameron's mouth closed. "So here is what is true," Alara said. The filing completes in 59 minutes. When it completes, Cameron Vale and Warren Pell and every account connected to the Coastal Merit Solutions structure become subjects of a federal financial crimes investigation. That happens whether you're standing in this lobby or sitting in a federal interview room or somewhere else entirely. She stopped. The only variable is whether your cooperation in the next 59 minutes produces a distinction that matters to the people who will be deciding your future. He looked at her for a long moment. His hands, she noticed, were at his sides and very still, in the way that hands are still when their owner is preventing them from moving rather than when movement simply hasn't occurred to them. "If I cooperate," he said, "Pell will know within the hour." "Pell is going to know everything within the hour regardless," she said. "The question is what position you're in when he does." The lobby was very quiet. Somewhere in the parking structure, a car door closed. Dell managing the perimeter, she assumed, or one of whoever Pell had sent, and the sound of it reminded her that the 59 minutes were not abstract. Cameron Vale looked at the floor, then he looked at the elevator bank. Then he looked at Alara with an expression that had shed the last of whatever he had been performing, and was simply the face of a man who was tired in a way that went deeper than one night. "I want an attorney present," he said. "Call one," she said. He took his phone from his pocket. She watched him dial and waited until she heard the call connect and heard him begin to speak, and then she turned and walked to the far end of the lobby and took her own phone out and sent Roman a single word. "Lobby." Roman came down 4 minutes later. He looked at Cameron on the phone in the corner of the lobby and then at Alara, and she gave him a nod that communicated enough. He stood beside her, and they waited, not speaking, while Cameron talked to his attorney in a low, rapid voice that carried across the empty lobby in fragments. Phrases like managed exposure and cooperation framework and timeline for disclosure. The language of a man translating his life into legal strategy in real time. "The filing," Alara said quietly. 44 minutes, Roman said. He had his own phone in his hand. Aldrin sent an update. "He's through the primary documentation phase. The financial annexes are uploading now." "Mara?" "Upstairs, Priya's with her." A pause. She asked about her children twice. Priya told her what we know about the custody order challenge timeline. "Is she holding?" "Yes," Roman said. "She's holding." Alara exhaled slowly. The lobby air was cool and slightly recycled, the particular quality of air in a building at 2 in the morning when the ventilation system was running at its overnight minimum, and she breathed it and felt the specific exhaustion of someone who had been in motion for 53 hours and was now, for the first time, standing still while something else moved. "Pell," she said. "He sent someone here tonight." "1 car," Roman said. 2 people. They're still in the structure. Dell has the exit. When the filing completes, they'll know, Roman said. Pell will know. His people in the structure will receive instruction and they'll leave, because there's nothing to be gained by being in a building where a federal filing has just been completed and a federal agent is on the 5th floor. He paused. Pell is not a physical threat. He's a systemic one. His power is procedural. Once the procedure goes against him, his tools don't work. He still has connections, she said. He has connections that will spend the next 48 hours deciding whether those connections are assets or liabilities, Roman said. That's the thing about a network built on self-interest. The moment the center stops holding, every node starts calculating its own survival. Cameron ended his call. He stood for a moment and then crossed the lobby toward them with the careful, deliberate walk of someone who had made a decision and was now committed to its direction, even though the direction was entirely new. My attorney is coming, he said. She'll be here in 20 minutes. Roman looked at him. You'll go upstairs and wait. Yes. You'll say nothing to anyone up there without her present. I understand. Roman held his gaze for a moment with the particular quality of attention he applied to things he was deciding whether to trust, and then he nodded once and gestured toward the elevator. Cameron walked ahead of them. The three of them rode to the 5th floor in a silence that was not comfortable and was not pretending to be. And when the doors opened and Cameron saw Aldrin working at the conference table and Mara Ellison sitting at the end of it, something happened in Cameron's body that was not quite a flinch and was not quite a stumble. It was a hesitation, 2 steps through the door, and then stillness. Mara looked up. She looked at Cameron Vale for the first time in more than a year, and what was in her face was not the thing that people who had not been through what she had been through might have expected. It was not rage. It was not collapse. It was something harder and quieter than both of those. The specific expression of someone who had finally, after a very long time, been handed the confirmation of what they had always known was true, and who no longer needed anyone's acknowledgement of it because they had stopped needing acknowledgement from outside themselves somewhere around month 10 of a facility they should never have been in. She looked at him for 4 seconds. Then she looked back at her photograph. Cameron sat in a chair near the door and did not speak. Aldrin's filing completed at 3:17 in the morning. Alara knew it because Aldrin said quietly and without ceremony, "It's done," and closed his laptop, and the room absorbed this the way rooms absorb things that are significant but not loud. A collective exhale, a shift in posture, the specific relaxation of people who have been holding something at tension for a long time and have finally been permitted to set it down. Aldrin looked at Roman. "I'm going to need formal statements from everyone in this room within the next 12 hours, he said. Ms. Voss, Ms. Ellison, and the forensic analysis from Ms. Anand all need to be on record before Vale or Pell's attorneys can begin filing counter-challenges." "You'll have them," Roman said. Aldrin looked at Cameron. "Mr. Vale, your attorney is welcome to be present, but I'll want to speak with you before morning." He paused. "Cooperation is being noted." Cameron nodded. His face had the quality of a room after a fire. Not destroyed, but everything that had been in it reduced to something unrecognizable. Aldrin packed his bag with the methodical efficiency of a man who had done this many times and understood that the hours after a major filing were not a conclusion, but a beginning. The beginning of a much longer, slower process that would grind forward through the court system with the impersonal momentum of institutional machinery that could not be bribed or charmed or curated into a different shape. He had made the first move in that machinery tonight. The rest would follow in its own time. He paused at the door. He looked at Alara. "The woman in the parking structure of the Alderton Grand Hotel 3 nights ago," he said. "Was that the beginning of this?" "No," she said. "The beginning was a subfolder and a flash drive and a coat check ticket." She paused. "The parking structure was just when I stopped being alone with it." Aldrin held her gaze for a moment. Then he left. The days that followed were not clean or simple. The machinery Aldrin had set in motion did not move with the narrative satisfaction of a conclusion. It moved the way legal processes move, with delays and procedural challenges and the specific frustration of watching something important travel through a system that was built for precision rather than speed. Warren Pell was placed under federal investigation within 72 hours of the filing. His attorneys released a statement disputing the characterization of his financial relationships, the language of which was careful and technical and designed to create doubt rather than answer questions. He did not appear in public. His court docket was suspended pending the investigation, which affected 41 active cases, and the reassignment of those cases to other judges was itself a complicated process that took 3 weeks to complete. Cameron Vale was formally charged 6 weeks after the filing. The charges covered fraud, conspiracy, and the deliberate obstruction of justice in 11 documented survivor cases. His attorney negotiated a cooperation agreement that reduced the potential sentence in exchange for complete disclosure of his relationship with Pell and the other judicial figures Priya's trace had identified. Cameron signed it on a Tuesday morning in a room that contained his attorney and a federal prosecutor and no one else. And the signing was not filmed and was not witnessed by anyone who would describe it publicly, which was the agreement. But Alara knew about it because Aldrin told Roman and Roman told her, and she sat with the information for a long time before deciding what she felt about it. She felt primarily that it was not satisfaction. Satisfaction was too clean for what it was. It was more like the specific relief of a weight that had been distributed across your body for so long that you had stopped perceiving it as a weight and had begun perceiving it as the normal condition of existing. And then the weight shifted, not all at once, but in stages. And what you felt in each stage was not joy, but the strange, almost disorienting lightness of a body recalibrating to a load it no longer had to carry. Mara Ellison's guardianship order was voided by a federal court order 11 days after the filing. She walked out of the courthouse with an attorney Roman had retained for her, a real one, who operated in the clear light rather than behind layers of shell companies. and she stood on the courthouse steps in the February cold and breathed the air, which was the same air as always but felt different in the way that all air feels different when you are breathing it by your own choice. Her custody challenge was more complicated and took longer. Courts moved slowly, and the reassignment of Pell's cases had created administrative delays that her new attorney navigated with careful persistence. But 6 weeks after the guardianship void, a family court judge reviewed the custody ruling from Pell's court and found sufficient grounds to order a reassessment. The reassessment took another month. At the end of it, Mara stood in a different kind of room with her children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5, who had spent 16 months being told, in careful child-sized language, that their mother was unwell and needed special help. And she held them in the way that people hold things they had prepared themselves never to hold again, which is to say, she held them too tightly and didn't apologize for it. Alara was not in the room for that. She heard about it from Roman, who heard about it from Priya, who had stayed in Mara's life in the way that people who have been through something together sometimes stay in each other's lives. Not as a formal arrangement, but as a presence, checking in, following the progress of things, bearing witness in the quiet, unglamorous way that the important kinds of witnessing often happened. Priya also testified in the federal proceedings, delivering her financial analysis in the measured, precise language of professional expertise that had none of the drama of a courtroom moment from a film and all of the weight of someone who had spent 36 hours tracing a corrupt financial structure and was now explaining clearly and methodically exactly what she had found and exactly what it meant. Her testimony was described in coverage of the proceedings as pivotal, which was the word that journalists reached for when they wanted to indicate that something had mattered, without wanting to explain in detail how the thing had worked. Judge Warren Pell was indicted on 14 counts 7 weeks after the filing. The indictment included charges that covered 8 years of judicial corruption, conspiracy, fraud, and the fraudulent deprivation of civil rights. The last charge carrying the specific weight of federal civil rights law, which had a different ceiling than the others, and which Aldrin's team had included deliberately, because it was the charge that was most difficult to reduce through plea negotiation, and which ensured that whatever cooperation agreements were reached, the sentence that resulted would be one that was commensurate with 8 years of using a courtroom to destroy the lives of women who had been looking for protection. Pell's network, as Roman had predicted, began to dissolve the moment its center stopped holding. The individuals connected to the secondary accounts, the 2 additional judicial figures Priya had identified in the trace, along with 3 private attorneys who had facilitated case outcomes for payments through the shell structure, each reached their own calculation about the relative merits of cooperation versus exposure, and most of them reached it quickly, because the math of self-preservation was the same math that had made them useful to Pell in the first place, and it worked as efficiently in his undoing as it had in his operation. Roman Ashford's name appeared in the federal proceedings in a limited capacity, as the individual who had provided initial assistance to the primary witness and who had facilitated the secure meeting in which the federal filing was initiated. His attorney managed this carefully, and Aldrin's characterization of Roman's role in the formal documentation was factual and unembellished, which was the most Roman had asked for and the most he expected. His other interests, the properties and the accounts, and the various operations that existed in the spaces between fully illuminated and fully obscure, were not the subject of the investigation and were not examined. He donated 3 of his properties to transitional housing organizations in the months following. He did it without a press announcement and without a charitable foundation named after himself, which was noticed by the people who knew him and not noticed by anyone else, which was the intended balance. Dell received a raise. Dell did not comment on this. Sandra, who had managed the operational details of the hotel situation with the efficiency she applied to everything, received nothing additional because she had told Roman in their debrief that she did not want anything additional and that she would be grateful if he did not make it strange. He did not make it strange. She continued to wear the same black dress to every event. The charges against Cameron Vale were processed through the federal system over a period of 4 months. The cooperation agreement reduced his exposure substantially. This was its function and its cost, but did not eliminate it, because the nature of what he had done to 11 women over 6 years, and what he had specifically done to Mara Ellison, existed in the record with a specificity and a completeness that no agreement could significantly diminish. His sentencing hearing was not attended by the cameras and crowds that had attended his award ceremonies, which was its own kind of accounting. He received 7 years, with the cooperation agreement holding the ceiling. His attorney called it a reasonable outcome. Alara was not asked for her opinion and did not offer it. The Mara Ellison Justice Initiative was Alara's idea in the way that ideas are sometimes less inventions than they are recognitions. The acknowledgement that something you have been moving toward has a name. She spent 2 months after the federal proceedings establishing it as a nonprofit, working with Roman's attorney on the legal structure and with Priya on the financial architecture, which Priya found darkly amusing given the circumstances and said so once, briefly, and did not repeat. The initiative's mission was the review of survivor legal cases in Georgia for evidence of judicial or legal manipulation, with particular attention to cases that had resulted in custody loss, commitment orders, or legal silencing of the survivor. It was not a dramatic mission. It was not the kind of work that produced visible singular victories. It was the kind of work that happened in case files and courtrooms, and the careful conversations of attorneys who understood that the corruption Cameron and Pell had operated was not a unique aberration, but a pattern that existed wherever the incentive structures that had enabled it also existed. Alara was not a lawyer. She hired two. She was not a forensic accountant. She retained Priya on a consulting basis. She was not a therapist. She built a referral network. What she was, she discovered in the first weeks of the initiative's operation, was someone who understood from the inside how the machine worked. Not the financial machine or the legal machine, but the machine of systematic disbelief. The apparatus by which women who told the truth about what had happened to them were transformed through the application of enough institutional pressure and the collaboration of enough positioned men into women whose truth was reclassified as instability. She had lived inside that machine. She understood its mechanisms with the precision of someone who had been processed by them. And that precision turned out to be, in the work she was now doing, worth more than almost any credential she could have held. She met with Mara for coffee on a Thursday morning in March, 4 months after the night at Stillwater. The coffee shop was in a neighborhood in Atlanta that neither of them had a particular history with, which was part of why they'd chosen it. Neutral ground, no associations, just a table and 2 cups, and the particular ease of 2 people who had been through something together and had come out the other side still intact, which was not something either of them had been certain of at the time. Mara's children were in school. She talked about this, about the routine of school drop-off, the specific negotiations of a 7-year-old's lunch preferences, the way her daughter had decided that Wednesdays were the only acceptable day for the color purple in any form, and she talked about it with the particular attention of someone who understood that the ordinary weight of daily life with children was not a burden, but a restoration, proof of something continuing. "How's the initiative?" Mara asked. "Overwhelming," Alara said. "We've had 32 case referrals in the first 8 weeks." Mara nodded. She knew what that number meant without Alara explaining it. "Are you sleeping?" "Better," Alara said. "Not consistently, but better." "Me too." Mara turned her coffee cup in her hands. "I still wake up sometimes, and for about 4 seconds, I think I'm still there. In the facility." She paused. "And then I hear my kids." Alara was quiet. "It doesn't go away fast," Mara said. It was not a complaint. It was the sharing of information between 2 people who understood the same landscape. Everyone wants it to go away fast. The people who love you, the people who helped you. They want the resolution to be complete, like a door closing. She stopped. "But you know." "I know," Alara said. "Do you think about him?" Mara asked. The him was understood. Alara thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about it. "Sometimes," she said, "not the way I used to. In the beginning it was constant. He was in every room I walked into before I walked into it. I was always pre-building the version of the room that would manage his response." She paused. "Now it's more like, I'll be reading a case file and I'll recognize something, a pattern, the way a case gets managed in a certain direction. And I'll think, I know exactly how that happened. And I know because I lived inside the thinking of someone who did it." She stopped. "It's useful, the knowing. I didn't expect it to be useful." Mara looked at her steadily. "Is that enough? That it's useful?" "For now," Alara said. "Yeah, for now it is." They finished their coffee. Outside the window, Atlanta was doing its mid-morning business. People with places to go, pedestrians, and delivery vehicles, and the ordinary churn of a city that had contained, within its ordinary operations, the specific evil of men like Cameron and Pell, and which had also contained, within those same operations, everyone who had helped dismantle it, Roman and Priya and Dell and Aldrin and Mara herself, all of them just people, none of them uncomplicated, none of them operating from perfect positions, all of them having made choices in the middle of the night in bad conditions with insufficient information and done the best that could be done with what they had, which was, Alara thought, most of what surviving came down to. Roman came to the initiative's offices 3 weeks after it opened. He did not announce the visit. He called 30 minutes ahead, which was the most advanced notice he gave for most things, and which Alara had come to understand was not curtness, but the reflection of a man who made decisions quickly and expected others to be capable of adapting to that pace, and who had learned, specifically in relation to her, to give a window rather than just arriving. She met him at the door. The offices were on the second floor of a building in Decatur, 2 rented rooms and a reception area that a volunteer had decorated with more enthusiasm than resources, and it looked exactly like what it was, which was the beginning of something rather than the finished version of it. He looked at it with his standard assessment expression. "You need more space," he said. "We need a lot of things," she said, "but space is on the list." He came inside and she showed him the case wall. The organizational system she had built with Priya over 3 weekends, the grid of case files and connection maps, and the color-coded tracking system that Priya had designed to identify patterns across multiple cases. Roman looked at it for a long time without speaking, moving his eyes across the grid with the attention of someone who was used to reading complex systems and was reading this one. "You built this in 8 weeks, he said. "We built this in 8 weeks, she said. "Priya designed the tracking system. The 2 attorneys I hired did the case intake framework. I just told everyone what I needed it to do." "That's not small," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not." He turned from the wall and looked at her with the expression she had catalogued over the past several months. Not the controlled blankness of their first days, not the careful assessment of someone deciding whether to trust, but the expression of a man who had stopped performing restraint and was simply present, which was rarer than it should have been, and which she had come to recognize as the most honest version of him. "How are you?" he said. It was a simple question, the kind of question that most people answered automatically and without examination, because most people were fine in a way that didn't require examination. She was not fine in that way. She was fine in a more complicated way, which she had spent several months learning to describe accurately rather than conveniently. "I'm building something," she said. "Most days that's enough." He looked at her. "And the days it's not?" She met his eyes. "I call Priya," she said, "or I go for a run, or I sit in the office at 9 at night and read case files until I understand something I didn't understand before." She paused. "I'm figuring out what enough looks like. It takes longer than you think it will." Roman was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been thinking about the shelter project, the residential program I told you about in February. I want to attach a legal review component to it, a pipeline that connects women in the program with the kind of case review you're doing here." "You'd need to talk to my attorneys about the structure," she said, "and the case intake criteria would need to fit with what the shelters program can actually support." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them was the history of a parking structure and a flash drive and several nights in which everything had been in motion and nothing had been safe, and also 4 months of something quieter than that. Phone calls and shared meals, and the particular closeness that developed between people who had been through something together and had chosen, after the through was over, to remain in each other's radius. "Stay," she said. "We can go through the intake framework now." "I have time," he said. They went to her desk. She made coffee. He sat across from her, and they spread the case intake documents between them on the desk and began the work of connecting 2 things that could be more useful together than apart, which was the kind of work that didn't look like much from the outside and was, from the inside, everything. The Atlanta Justice Awards were held that year without a keynote speaker. The organization, after considerable internal discussion that spilled into public coverage of the proceedings against Cameron Vale, made a statement about the vetting processes for honorees and the organization's commitment to structural review of its selection criteria. The statement was careful and institutional and said very little that was direct. It was read and largely disbelieved by most people who encountered it, because by then the full scope of what Cameron Vale had done while collecting awards from exactly this kind of organization had been extensively documented, and the appetite for institutional statements was understandably limited. The chair of the organization called Ilara 3 times. She returned the third call. She did not attend the event, and she did not send a statement, and she did not participate in any way in the organization's public process of demonstrating that it was taking the situation seriously. She was busy. There were 32 cases on the initiative's intake wall, and by the end of the month there would be 47, and 2 of them looked like they had the same fingerprints as the Pell structure, which meant they needed careful attention and careful documentation and the kind of patient, methodical work that did not produce a moment in a lobby at 2 in the morning where everything was at stake, but which produced over time the slow dismantling of the machinery that created those lobbies in the first place. Ilara was at her desk at 7 in the evening when she finally stopped working. The office was empty. Priya had left at 5. The 2 attorneys had a court appearance in the morning and had gone to prepare. The volunteer who managed the reception area had turned off the lights in the front room. She sat in the quiet of the back office and looked at the case wall. 32 women, 32 files. 32 versions of a particular experience, each with its own details and its own specific damage and its own specific resilience. Because the 2 things always existed together, damage and resilience. You didn't get one without the other. And after 18 months of learning that the hard way, she had stopped trying to separate them in herself and had started understanding them as the same thing wearing different faces. She thought about the basement, the pillar, the wire. She thought about a coat check ticket and the specific clarity with which she had remembered its number while sitting on concrete with blood on her collar. She had remembered it because she was not done, because she had a plan, even then, even in that basement, even before Roman Ashford walked through the fluorescent-lit corridor and crouched down to her level and said his name. She had been building this from before the moment anyone came to help her, which was the part of the story she found hardest to explain to people who wanted it to begin with rescue. It had not begun with rescue. It had begun with her, in a subfolder, with a flash drive, with the particular decision that the information she had found was not going to stay hidden, regardless of what it cost to surface it. Everything else had been the cost. She turned off her desk lamp. She put on her jacket. She walked through the office and turned off the remaining lights, and she locked the door behind her, and she stood for a moment on the second-floor landing in the dark, listening to the building settle around her. Downstairs, Atlanta was still going. It was always still going. That was the thing about cities. Well, they did not pause for the things that happened inside them, the enormous and the terrible and the quiet and the transformative, all of it absorbed into the ongoing business of a place that contained everything and narrated nothing. She walked down the stairs and out into the evening, and the air was cold and clear and entirely her own, and she breathed it the way she had learned to breathe things that belonged to her, slowly and without apology and without looking over her shoulder. She was 26 years old. She had 32 cases on her wall and 2 attorneys and a forensic accountant who called on Wednesdays and a man who showed up 30 minutes after he called and stayed until the work was done. She had the knowledge of what she had survived and the understanding of how she had survived it, which was not by being saved but by refusing, even in a basement, even in the dark, to stop building the thing that would eventually save herself. That was enough. That was, for now, exactly enough.